Good evening, everyone. I'm Ashley Banfield. This is Primetime Justice, and we're following several big stories tonight. And in a moment, I'm going to get to that disturbing set of new details about the Texas church shooter who apparently was not firing at nameless and faceless people. He was firing at a church full of people that he knew personally. There is a god-awful amount of evil involved with that detail if you really think through it. And we've got more astounding details coming up about his past, like what he did to animals and what he did to babies. But we begin tonight in another small Texas town because while all eyes and all attention have understandably been on the church shooting, something was happening in Maybank, Texas, just southeast of Dallas, that would bring even seasoned law enforcement to their knees. A heartless killer put two little girls, sisters, ages 5 and 7, in the crosshairs and pulled the trigger, shot them in the head in cold blood late at night when they should have been nestled in their beds. Kenley and Kaylee did not stand a chance. And that's because the police say their killer knew their every move, their minute-by-minute routine, even their favorite toys and foods. It is hard to believe it, but the local sheriff says those little angels were executed by their own mother. And the disturbing clues that were left behind do not even require the faintest knowledge of forensics. You just have to be able to listen.
Henderson County 911.
Yes. My wife just shot her kid.
Okay, is this Jacob?
Yes.
Okay, what is your wife's name?
She's trying to commit suicide now. She's trying to choke herself. Why do you keep grabbing your neck?
What is her name, sir?
Sarah Henderson.
Sarah Henderson?
Yes, ma'am.
And how old are the children?
7 and 5.
And they're in the bedroom?
Huh?
Are they in the bedroom, sir?
No, they're in the living room.
They're in the living room and they're not breathing?
No.
Were you home when she did this, or did you just get home?
I was asleep.
You were asleep?
Yes.
Is she under the influence of any drugs or alcohol?
No.
The man who made those calls, Jacob Henderson, is Sarah's husband, who said he was asleep. You heard that when the girls were shot. And investigators say he himself is lucky to be alive because he was scheduled to die too. They say, but for the grace of God, the gun jammed when she turned it on him. Now, we have no idea why she allegedly tried to kill her whole family, but we do know about another call that came from the house that night just 3 hours earlier. Jacob called for help because he said Sarah was acting strange.
CMS, this is Patricia.
Yes, ma'am. I was wondering if I could get somebody to come out here and check my wife out. My wife, she's like, I don't know, something's going on with her.
Okay. Can you describe what's going on, the symptoms?
Like she's freaking out, like somebody's out to get her.
Jacob called back minutes later to say that everything was fine. And the deputies who visited the house regardless decided there was no danger. But now the town is planning for Kenley and Kaylee's burials while their mother sits in jail on suicide watch. She is charged with 1 count of capital murder with another one pending, which I don't need to remind many of our viewers in Texas, that could bring with it the death penalty. Alina DeBrine is a reporter with DallasNews.com, and she joins me live now from Dallas. Alina, thanks so much for being here. It is a horrifying story. It is unfathomable, especially when you hear the play-by-play that comes from this husband. Tell me a little bit more about him and his integral role in how this played out.
So he had said that they had gone to sleep together, and then he woke up to her saying, "Babe, I just shot the kids." And he said that he didn't believe her, and then he went to the living room and found Kaylee and Kenley shot in the head. And then he calls 911, and like everyone just heard, he said that she was acting suicidal. And throughout the 911 calls, he's crying, and he, you know, as any father would, but yet the mother is continuously asking questions, why did I do that? Lord, please forgive me. And he is continuing to talk to the 911 operator, trying to get help. And the 911 operator asks if the girls are breathing, and he says no. And then, of course, she says, why did I do that? What's going on? And then he tells the 911.
The 911 call seems to be where our public information ends, and yet they have said that he was supposed to be next and that the gun jammed. How do we know this, and is someone talking, either him or is she talking?
Not as of now. We know that from the sheriff of Henderson County. He has said that the gun had malfunctioned, and that was why the husband was able to survive this incident. So
I want to play, there's more. I mean, the 911 interaction between this family and the operators is so telling. There's just a rich minefield of information in the 911 calls. And I want to play this one. This one came in at about 2:24 a.m. This is right after the kids were shot. You can hear Sarah Nicole Henderson in the background, and you can certainly hear Jacob Henderson as he's making his appeal to the operator. Have a listen.
We have an ambulance headed that way, as well as officers, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Is there anything else you need to...
No.
Okay.
Why did I do that, babe? I don't know.
She's not trying to leave or anything, correct?
What's going on here, Jay? Nothing's going on. That's what I tried telling you. She keeps saying somebody's after her. There's nobody after her. There's nothing. She keeps saying people are coming. There's nobody even here.
And she hasn't been under the influence of any type of drugs or anything?
No. What did I do, Lord? What did I do? What did I do, God? What did I do, God?
Alina, just quickly, we know that CPS had been to that home in 2011. We know the police actually had reported for a verbal disturbance at that home in 2015. But apart from that, do we have any idea about motive for why this horrifying crime would have happened?
We don't at this time. We don't.
It's just that simple. This is mystifying to the police and to neighbors and to everybody in this community, Maybank, Texas. Alina, stand by if you will for a moment. I want to bring in Dr. Daniel Bober. He's a forensic psychiatrist and an assistant clinical professor at the Yale School of Medicine. He joins me from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Dr. Bober, maybe you can help me wade through this because, it is, you hear about it, you hear about infanticide, you hear about parents taking their own children's lives, not that infrequently, but infrequently enough that it's shocking each time. And then you hear that call, and I called it a minefield because I'm wondering if there's something you heard differently in there that could actually speak to a defense for this woman.
Ashley, as you said, filicide or a parent killing a child is actually a fairly common phenomenon occurring on the average about 500 times a year in the United States. It's most often the father that's the perpetrator, and in this case, it's the mother, and that usually happens about 40% of the time. But when you think about a case like this, you think about Andrea Yates, Susan Smith, and the common thread here is mental illness. And the part of the 911 call that stood out the most for me was when the father said, please send the police because I feel like someone is following, or my wife is being followed by someone. To me, that was actually the most ominous sign of the entire call, because to me that indicates paranoia, and paranoia is a risk factor for violence. And so I feel like that was a sort of a sense of foreboding that this was going to occur.
So, Dr. Bober, there's something else that wasn't on the 911 call but is reported from the police and witnesses. Sarah Henderson apparently showed no remorse whatsoever, no emotion at the time of her arrest, a complete flat affect. Can you read into that?
I read that there may have been a history of bipolar disorder. The husband said in the 911 call that there was no substance use or alcohol intoxication, but I do think that mental illness is going to be a big part in the motive behind this.
So if you know, look, this is extraordinarily serious in any state, and particularly in Texas, where this is capital crime. Those kids were under the age of 16, and that means death penalty eligible. But going after the death penalty is a tricky business when you're looking at a woman with mental illness. Just ask the two different trial players, you know, in Andrea Yates' trial. Is this the kind of trial you expect you're going to see here, that they go after her for the death penalty because of the egregious nature of what happened to those little girls?
I don't think so. Juries are not very sympathetic to these types of crimes. Juries want someone to pay when a child is murdered. Obviously, it's a very, very visceral, emotional crime. But I think at the end of the day, just like Susan Smith and Andrea Yates, I see life imprisonment being more likely here than the death penalty.
If I can, I want to go back to Alina for a moment. Alina, you know, we're also hearing from local police that they believe that Sarah Nicole Henderson planned this for 2 weeks. Do we have any idea how they know that?
No, at this time, we are not sure how they know that. They said it was at least 2 weeks, so it could have been even more than that.
I want to bring in former prosecutor Robert Schalk, who joins me live on the set. I asked it of Dr. Bober, and I'm going to ask you, as a former prosecutor, do you look at this and say, hell to pay, juries want blood, this woman deserves death penalty, and I'm going after it? Or do you look at it saying, look, I want to get what I can get, and it's real hard to convict on death penalty if there's mental illness?
Calculated decision. I think pre-trial evaluations from doctors are going to tell a lot as to whether or not they're willing to plea bargain this case and take the death penalty off the table and say, hey, listen, if their doctors come back and say that there was a history of mental illness, if she's been previously diagnosed, medical records will spell that out. So will Google searches. They're going to be able to get into computers and cell phones. They're going to be able to talk to the husband potentially if he decides to cooperate. Remember,
he survived. Correct.
But you also have a husband who could invoke his marital privilege and say, I don't want to talk to you, I don't want to cooperate with you, as it pertains to certain aspects.
You heard that 911 call. Do you expect he's going to do that?
No, I wouldn't, but you never know. Things change, lawyers get involved. So I would think that they're going to use it as a bargaining tool in the sense that if there is something that is pre-existing and their doctors, I'm saying the doctors that work for the state and the prosecutor's office say, there's something here, you may see them negotiate the death penalty off the table.
And watch the story. Obviously, I think Andrea Yates captivated this nation because of the unbelievable cruelty of that crime. They're all different, yet they're all seemingly so the same. Bob Schalk, thank you. Alina DeBrine, thank you. And Dr. Daniel Bober, thank you as well. Straight ahead, a fight between neighbors.